Okay, we're back, and let's get started with the roundtable. So all the participants that actually gave presentations will be joining, and I think Takeshi, I'll pass it on to Takeshi to explain how others can participate as well.
Okay, maybe first I'd like to introduce myself. I haven't shown my face throughout this conference, but I listened to every single presentations. I was just really impressed. My name is Takeshi Morisato. I'm a specialist of Japanese philosophy, and I come from the study of Japanese philosophy, specifically Kyoto School, in the context of world philosophies. And I'm just impressed with the level of the creativity and sort of critical insight that you can provide on Japanese philosophy from the side of Laruelle in this conference. So I'd like to first congratulate the TUJ, Jordan, and the TUJ conference organizers. First 7 days in the beginning of Japanese year is a sacred holidays. So the fact that we were able to organize this in the beginning of the year, I was very skeptical, but I'm very happy, and also all participants for providing us with this rich comparative study of Laruelle and the Kyoto School. I'd like to give you a little bit of short episode before we start the roundtable, how this conferences came to be. I used to work at the TUJ, Temple University Japan campus, as adjunct professor right next, and then my desk was right next to Jordan's. And I was working on Kyoto School, and Jordan was working on Laruelle and Kyoto School, and we couldn't agree on anything philosophical throughout our conversation. It's just the more discussions we have, the more disagreements throughout our conversation. But then the beauty of continental philosophy is that when you listen to something meaningful and significant, even if you disagree, and especially because you disagree, you realize there's something really rich in that area of study. So we came up with this idea of organizing Laruelle conference, which was done 2 years ago in Brussels. And then Jordan has this idea of organizing Laruelle and the Kyoto School. And I was very skeptical again, and I stand corrected. This conference is living proof that this area has rich implications in the history of philosophy, and both Laruelle studies and Japanese studies are growing as we speak. So I'm hoping that TUJ will organize this conference every year and kind of create this hub of conferences online. And if we are fortunate to be able to meet in person, I hope to see you again next year onwards and somewhere in the world for conference on Laruelle and comparative philosophy, for instance. Also, finally, I'd like to mention this great thing about starting the year with this conference on non-standard philosophy or non-philosophy, because it puts the pressure on the rest of the year. We go back to the philosophy department or classes where we have to teach philosophy, but this puts us in edge, sort of like we have to be critical what we're going to do for the rest of the year. So I'd like to share that enthusiasm again before we start this roundtable. Okay, so a couple different rules for the roundtable. I would like to ask a couple guiding questions. Hopefully maybe one or two. So I would like to ask participants to respond to these questions in whatever order, if whoever wants to respond to these questions. And I would like you, the conference participants, to share your questions, but try to stick the central theme. So if you have questions from the presentations, try to tie that questions into the ongoing discussion among these participants. So we will be able to actually incorporate your questions. Also, the participants of this roundtable should be able to freely pick questions. So if you see one question that I'd like to respond to that question, please raise your hand and go with that questions, and other participants will respond to it. So we would like to have a little bit of organic format. With your questions on the chat room, if you have any specific participants you would like to address your question to, please put their name first. So say, Siklovsky or Jordancho, you know, and then space and your question. So that's something that I would like to mention. Does anybody from participants have any concerns or suggestions? We're good to go?
We have Anne-Françoise as well joining us. And
okay,
I'd
great.
just like to call on Katerina. I'm not sure if she's listening to us. Katerina? I think everyone else is here, right?
Yeah. And feel free to use this reaction button proactively. So I was listening to the conference and I'm laughing as the presenters making remarks, but they can't hear us.
Yeah,
so it'll be good to share.
And Colozo, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, so first, I'd like to start this discussion with sharing a few presuppositions. So my questions come from a certain standpoint that you might not agree. So you could actually attack my presupposition for raising these questions. So first, I would like to share a few presuppositions. First one is that Laruelle's non-standard philosophy has been studied on the margin of philosophy. So if you go to philosophy department, the chance that you hear or study the works of Laruelle, it's quite slim, even in Europe, and probably more so in Japan and North America. Second presupposition is the Japanese philosophy in the context of world philosophy is also studied on the margin of philosophy. So we're dealing with this.
Не, ми зборила, Вој, ти кажав дека сум на конференција. Oh, sorry.
That's okay. It's a beautiful.
Okay, Stanimir and Jordancho understood.
It's the Macedonian
My daughter is asking me whether I sent an email, and I told her, I'm telling him I am at the conference. Sorry.
That's okay.
Instead of unmuting myself, I turned off the video. Sorry.
That's okay.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah. So that's two presuppositions, and then of the field of non-standard philosophy and the field of Japanese philosophy, specifically the Kyoto School. So they seem to face similar challenges in the field of philosophy, and advancement of one seems to entail the other. That's the presupposition that I would like to start. So if we are going to study the Japanese philosophy or Kyoto School, the principle by which we promote that study seem to entail study of non-standard philosophy. So question one. Laruelle's philosophy gives a comprehensive analysis of philosophy, specifically in Anglo-European philosophical context, and also offers a radical alternative to the discipline of philosophy or Anglo-European philosophy, both in theory and practice. So my question is this: how could this serve as one of the pieces in the field of philosophy, and what could philosophy program would look like if we include his ideas as the basis of philosophy? So it seems, Laruelle's philosophy is providing this radical critique of the way we do philosophy, right? But if we put that into the centerpiece of the way we do philosophy, how does that philosophy look like? Or is this question even sensible to ask? So that's the first question I would like to share with the participants. Anyone?
First, I would just like to add that, this conference was also born by Professor Gangle coming to Japan during a sabbatical that was canceled. And we were supposed to have a conference at TUJ, which would have been much smaller, obviously, and a lot of people would not have been able to travel. And in a sense, thanks to the crisis, unfortunately, it was a crisis. We changed the format, and here we are in 3 time zones around the world, speaking to each other, which I think was a very, very good experience for all of us. So I would like to thank Rocco for initiating, starting this idea of doing something in this regard. So then we took it on, and here we are. And I'd like to thank Takeshi for making the poster for the conference, which is really good. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting how that maybe connects to Takeshi's question that, you know, in this case, you know, a crisis led to a change of venue and, you know, a new format that turned out to be successful. And I think that the question of the place of non-philosophy, and also the question of a globalization of philosophy, or a de-provincializing of European philosophy, is a question that we can only ask today in the context of the breakdown of the traditional university system, at least in the United States and the UK. I don't know to what extent that's true in continental Europe or in other parts of the world, but certainly higher education, the German university model that has been prevalent in, say, in the United States since the late 19th century, really is collapsing. And that might be an opportunity to form new kinds of institutional structures, and I think more modular ones, rather than thinking of how could we embed students interested in non-philosophy into traditional non-philosophy, in traditional philosophy departments. I think it's a question of what kind of academic or para-academic constellation could be formed around the work of Laruelle, or around, you know, in this case, the, you know, something as precise and specific as the link between Laruelle's work and the Kyoto School. There's no way a traditional philosophy department would hire someone just to do that unless it was a huge department, right? There wouldn't be enough room to have someone who specializes in something that limited. It would have to be someone who works on Asian philosophy, you know, or continental philosophy. There's this need for general specialization. But I think there are opportunities today to construct forms of community that can be global and yet very, very small, right? And we're witness to this right now. We have, you know, 30 people here right now who are coming together from all over the world, and yet our focus is very, very narrow.
Right.
And there's no reason why this community wouldn't be able to develop and institutionalize itself outside of any kind of bricks and mortar traditional university system.
It's very interesting how the sorry, Katarina, please.
Yeah, I wanted to add something that it's not so unusual and impossible or unimaginable that Laruelle studies would be integrated in an academic system, proper academic institutions. I found out last year that in Prague, at King Charles University, I think it's the state university in Prague, in the doctoral studies program, there is, it's not a course, it's basically a subspecialization in Laruelle. And by the way, Marx, even I'm mentioned there. So there is a whole section of a curriculum at, you know, PhD level. Jan Sousa, a colleague that Stanimir probably knows, I think you met him in Skopje. He studies there, and he sent me a link to this program. So then there is this ample use of Laruelle in performance studies arts in many departments, or media and communication arts. So it does not necessarily, or studies, sorry, does not necessarily have to be philosophy, but interestingly, it seems that he's better integrated in countries like the Czech Republic or Norway or Holland than France itself. So, yeah.
There's even in the European academic system, there's a kind of crack in where this Laruelle studies is coming through these.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
sure.
right.
Yeah.
Stanimil? Sorry, I skipped you over. Can you?
No, it's okay. A couple of things. First, to jump on the point Katerina just made and expand it a bit. I mean, whatever multipolarity means nowadays, it is a fact, and it of course has different iterations and manifestations, but in philosophy or non-philosophy. But I think it's important to say that in the context of Laruelle and non-philosophy broadly construed, so probably not just Laruelle, but everybody else associated with the school somehow. Macedonia is itself a case in point. I don't know how many people realize this, but thanks to the work of Katerina, I'm a student of hers, I'm Bulgarian originally, whatever. There is a community that actually formed through and via Macedonia. So these geographies actually function in quite unexpected ways. Jordancho also comes from Macedonian background, and he studied with Laruelle, obviously. And the journal Oraxium is published by the institute that Katerina runs in Skopje. So the whole community around this formed in a summer school that Katerina organized with Anne-Françoise and François Laruelle back in 2015. So I mean, these small communities of 30 people that Rocco just mentioned, they are indeed usually between 20 and 30. They're quite rich, and they function in these really unexpected geographies. But, and the other thing I wanted to say with regards to the opening question you mentioned, Takeshi, was when I was a first semester student at Sofia University here in Bulgaria, we only had a couple of courses in the first semester, which was quite striking. And I mean, it's important to mention that the Bulgarian educational system, and philosophy in particular, is construed after the German educational model. And this is true for Eastern Europe in many ways. And we only had 2 courses, and we only had Eastern philosophy and what is philosophy. And in what is philosophy, our teacher, our professor, decided to include a chapter from Deleuze and Guattari's What is Philosophy. And I think this was completely mind-blowing to me. I didn't obviously understand the thing. And I'm just thinking now, what would it mean to do this with a Laruelle text for a first semester student, right? It's not a matter of understanding and comprehension so much as to sort of opening up to kind of like mind-blowing yourself, right? I know it sounds like a banality, but that first semester Deleuze and Guattari experience I had still stays with me, and I just think that students should be exposed to uncomprehension. That's what I wanted to say.
Okay.
I just want to add and pick up from what Stanimir said, explaining about Macedonia. I mean, probably per capita, we have most non-philosophers in the world or something like that. But Katerina's right. So we're leading at least in something in the world, something good. What Katerina said that, you know, there are like graduate studies somewhere around Europe, and that's really great. But what I'm concerned with is what Stanimir said, is that, you know, what the first year, you know, freshman reading Laruelle would look like. And that's exactly the point. We need a structured system that trains students to actually, you know, familiarize and enter this really novel and difficult territory, right? So the acts, you know, Laruelle is really inaccessible because just like many other, you know, French theorists and continental theorists, he creates this new language, right? And we need to train students in order to, you know, learn and use the language, right, in a proper fashion. So we need something that starts early on, and then of course graduate projects such as, you know, masters and PhD would be great, to have the entire, you know, pipeline from the beginning till the end. So what would that look like? You know, where can non-standard philosophy or non-philosophy be integrated in a classical traditional philosophical departments? That's the real question, and I'm not sure if I have an answer, but I like Rocco's idea about the modular kind of approach to it. I think that might work. So we don't, you know, recreating the old institutions and making, you know, let's say the access to knowledge and more modular, so it can change as it evolves, and you know, the institution itself can adapt more easily to novel, you know, theories that emerge, instead of being entrenched in some kind of traditional theories, and, you know, don't let go until you have a change of professors, and maybe by chance, if someone gets to teach and who is trained non-philosopher, you know, randomly, maybe gets a position and kind of introduces something of that kind, but that's just one man, you know, show. It's not really an institutionalized you know, approach. So I think all the points were well made, and you know, we need to work on all levels here. So yeah, and I'm sorry, I think Mahbub was, yeah,
Mahbub, can you he's welcome to join, turn on the camera and ask question, right, Jordan? That's fine, right? Yeah, please.
Why not? Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Takeshi. Actually, I was about to withdraw my question, but now that you've invited me,
no. We got you.
Thank you. So I'm going to first of all just qualify what I'm about to say by making probably what's a banal remark, which is that my understanding of non-philosophy is very peculiar, you know, based on my own kind of background experiences. So I'm a little bit, I wonder to what extent we could integrate non-philosophy insofar as it is a radical practice within academia, in the sense that, again, to make a gross reduction, to the extent that academia requires a certain distance from the investigator and his or her object or their object, while non-philosophy, and I don't know really much at all about Japanese philosophy, I imagine that the similar kind of thing holds, where the individual is at stake. The actual investigator is at stake when they're whatever object they're investigating. And certainly that's been my experience with non-philosophy. And I would be concerned about the propensity to domesticate such a radical practice if it's brought within an academic fold, organized according to a curriculum, and so forth. And in that sense, I think it's probably, I do almost call it a dangerous activity, in the sense that it's a danger to the radicality and the radical possibilities of non-philosophy, but it's also a danger to the participants and to the students. And in fact, you know, unless they themselves are at danger, at risk, and at stake, I don't think that we're getting to the heart of what non-philosophy represents. And I would actually question, it's a question to the panel, that even this conference, it's the nature of a conference. It's a certain kind of medium where it introduces distance. We are detached from the topic of investigation and concern, which is a very, very different practice from actually reading the material. I think all of us would agree, whoever has struggled with non-philosophy, but that also applies to Deleuze and Guattari's texts, right? Most of continental philosophy texts, that when you're personally reading it, you suffer. And my concern is that whenever you read secondary literature or scholarly work, and perhaps it's just a necessary condition of scholarship, that you lose that stake. I'm wondering, so it's an open question then, to what extent could that kind of practice be incorporated within conventional academic manners, which have to live within kind of a capitalist system, you know, and with bureaucracy and so forth, and examinations, all of the rest of it that we all kind of know about and we complain about, but we don't really have much power to do much about, except in a kind of way. I hope that makes some sense.
No, that's it framed better than my original question. So that's perfect. Does anybody have a response to this? Let's start with Jordan, and then Katarina, and Stanimil. Do you have a question, answer? No, okay. So let's start with the Jordan and then Katerina.
So what Mahbub is saying, like non-philosophy being dangerous, I don't think that's really the case, right? Certainly it can be subversive, like a non-standard philosophical project can have subversive, effects on the entirety of the corpus of philosophy, but not necessarily. So that's why when Professor Gengel was, thinking about how to present as an arc, Laruelle's work, because there's so much there, and just in an hour or hour and a half, how to structure it. Again, it boils back to the fact that non-standard philosophy is positioned as a science of philosophy, right? Mm-hmm. So in a sense, there is an epistemological value there as a method, if not anything else. So, we can use it to train philosophers to also familiarize themselves with non-standard philosophy as a possible option, right, for inquiry into philosophy itself. So to kind of distance themselves from philosophy instead of being imbued into philosophical thinking itself. So it can be really useful. We can take different approaches, and I think it's not as dangerous as because maybe I'm not sure I understand, Mahbub, what you exactly mean by dangerous in this regard. See, François was teaching it in Nanterre for years. I was there, so there's nothing dangerous about it except turning yourself into a non-philosopher. So
it just seems like I'd like to add to Mahbub, because I share the same sentiment behind my question, is that the science of philosophy part seems quite practical. So it seems that we'll be able to actually do this sort of approaching the reality as what it is, instead of making this dual structure of thought and reality. So there's very practical, democracy of thought operative in non-standard philosophy from Rocco's introduction and tutorial. But other part of that presentation, he was saying, Rocco was saying that the entire history of philosophy up until Laruelle operated with this conception of philosophy as perennial. So it has this self-cloning position that is, think that this has the privilege for understanding the relationship between thought and reality, but that is false. We need to actually get rid of that. That is a huge existential statement. That's almost like saying somebody studying philosophy for 30 years after PhD, so like 40 years of the dedication, and you tell them that what you've been doing is just delusion. So that is the kind of structural problem that we have in philosophy. That's my corollary to Mahbub's question. Mahbub, would you have any response to?
Can I just interject, really
Sure.
briefly? I know others are waiting, but in this regard, I think it's important. Speaking of crisis, what Rocco said earlier, not just institutionally, but anyone who has studied, philosophy and started with proper history of philosophy knows that philosophy is always in crisis, right? And every new breakthrough philosophically is made to save philosophy from the crisis that itself produced, right? So in a sense, what saves philosophy and elucidates where the crisis is, what the movements are, will be non-standard philosophical approach in terms of method or as a science of philosophy, whichever, or both together, even better. So I apologize for taking too much time, but
okay, let's go to Katerina and then
just quickly, basically it just builds on your entire exchange, except I'm more optimistic about this issue along similar lines of thinking with Jordancho. I think that, first of all, I agree with Mahbub that this is a radical practice, but this radical practice does not need to be perceived as something mystical, something mystifying, something obscure as practice of thought. It can be a training in method that is also practical, as Jordancho said, and we tried to develop with together with our institute, together with Utrecht University, the Liberal Arts Department and the Center of Humanities, and Sofia University in Bulgaria. We tried to develop 4 experimental curricula where humanities, and in particular philosophy, but also whatever else might fall there, like, you know, critical feminist theory, whatever, you know, establish a closer, more democratic interaction with the natural sciences, technology, STEM sciences, etc. So we kind of noticed that, okay, we have these fields like you know, cognitive sciences. So you have philosophy there, but it kind of hangs there like certain, you know, meta position, like a specter around what is an actual practice. So we tried to propose a curriculum. One of the curricula, it's merely an example. There are other experimental curricula, like the para-human, based on a concept developed by a Bulgarian philosopher, Miglena Nikolchina, but I'll take just the first example. So we base the course that we curriculum, actually, it's a model curriculum we called the post-humanities and cognitive sciences, something like that. Now I'm improvising with the title, cannot remember exactly, but it kind of gives you the gist, what's it about. There, what is required is a certain treatment of philosophy that reads philosophy, of this so-called principle of philosophical sufficiency. You have to know a bit of Laruelle and a bit of Marx, perhaps, to approach philosophy in such way that it can engage in a productive cooperation with, you know, sciences proper. So I don't know if it will work. It's still, you know, an experimental curriculum, but, you know, we can have the pragmatic approach that, and purely methodological, that Jordan just suggests. We'll see if our curriculum works. We hope to establish a joint degree with Utrecht and Sofia, so we'll see how it all plays out and whether it's dangerous or not.
Well, yeah.
I would just like to add, that's great, Katerina, what you're trying to do. I hope it works. Yeah. And just one more thing, you know, last time we tried to, you know, reform and produce science of philosophy, we know what happened to that, right? It became sociology. So, you know, the method, it won't be the same this time, but, you know, we never know.
Yeah. Any response? Any questions?
I can probably just
Samuel,
mention,
please.
it's again something that I want to take up from Mahbub, one of Mahbub's comments. I do think he said several important things, but one thing that worried me a little bit was sort of the implication in his words on basically what the academia is. That the academia, Mahbub, is not a reactionary space of neoliberal capitalism that we embrace as such. It is what we make of it. I know that you probably don't mean it in this way, but what I'm trying to say is the academia, in its original sense, Greek, pre-European or not, is essentially, you know, just a modus operandi of our own intentions. And just to sort of like be afraid of giving non-philosophy to academia, it doesn't really make sense to me, if I called correctly your worries, but it did sound a little bit like that. The academia is where we are, where we want to be, and how we live. And integrating non-philosophy in academia is not either radical, as Katerina said, nor dangerous. It is something that we need to, I don't know if the word is normalize, it is something that we need to, go for.
The word is accept.
Yeah.
Where's the what? Jordan again?
Accept.
Accept. Forced. Okay. I'd like to perhaps just navigate this question a little bit to the history. So Jordan, for instance, mentioned that the Professor Schmidt actually taught non-standard philosophy at the university, or still teaching at the university. And also Laruelle himself actually taught in academia. And this is the result, the Joe Dancho and Katerina did the doctoral thesis under Professor Laruelle. So I'd like to actually ask Professor Schmidt, since you bless us with your presence. How did you teach non-standard philosophy, and would you like to share some personal difficulties or institutional troubles that you had, and sort of a history of teaching non-standard philosophy in France? Jordan, can you translate?
Françoise, donc Takeshi, il demande c'est quoi l'état de la philosophie non standard en France en ce moment? Oui. Y a quelqu'un qui enseigne, et où est-ce que toi tu t'en occupes à l'école de mine et tu utilises quelque chose de la philosophie de la non-philosophie de François? Oui. Et quelles sont des difficultés normalement pour quelqu'un qui veut s'établir en tant qu'enseignant de la philosophie non standard, même dans le milieu académique traditionnel, sans avoir un département de la non-philosophie ou des sciences génériques? C'est juste enseigner comme François l'avait fait à Nanterre il y a des années, donc juste à pratiquer et enseigner la philosophie non standard.
Yes. So in France, philosophy is history of philosophy in academia. So if a lived philosopher is in France, it is no hope to have some teaching of his or her thought. French philosophers are in margins. It is a report for of the Republic to explain there are a lot of philosophers in France, but they are not in the university. Or if they are in university, it is with some difficulties. Derrida was not in university. When he was candidate for Nanterre with Georges Labica and François Laruelle, the commission, the local commission, writes to the ministry that no one is capable to teach philosophy. No one. Neither Derrida, neither Labica, neither Laruelle. And finally, it is Labica who was nominated because he's Marxist, but normal Marxist, if he and they can have some control on him. So the French philosophers are known by the travel of their thoughts in other countries, perhaps most in USA, sans doute. But I was professor in an engineering school, and I was the only person who taught epistemology and philosophy and ethics. And so I can use the interpretation of epistemology from Laruelle, very different than the classical one. I I have the experience that classical epistemology is non-understood by the students. And I did not know why. So I was in the laboratories and I saw that the work in the laboratories have not relationship with classical epistemology. It's very now with studies on modeling, it is a little changed. It was possible to introduce other notion, other concept about sciences and about engineering. And for Laruelle, philosophy, the technique of philosophy, is very near of technique of engineering. It's an engineering of concepts. So, and it was not very difficult in this marginal post to use Laruelle. But now in France, the disciples of Laruelle, the disciples, they said they accept Laruelle, have not academic post. No one. They are informaticians. They are professor of cultural, but there are no specialization from Laruelle. But Laruelle has the best number of theses at Nanterre. He conducted 36 theses in Nanterre. 36. And the colleagues, beaucoup moins. beaucoup moins. So it was a problem. It was a problem for the academy. Laruelle had numerous theses in philosophy. So there are a lot of persons who are formed in France, but they are not in academy. Sauf peut-être Jean-Baptiste Dussert.
Mm-hmm.
Jean-Baptiste Dussert. Mais il n'enseigne pas directement la philosophie. Il enseigne dans une faculté de droit.
So it seems the society actually needs non-standard philosophy in some form or another. For instance, like history of philosophy department can handle ongoing discussion of physics.
But how to know what we need?
Mm-hmm. All right. Yeah.
It's difficult to say.
Yeah.
Tous les textes japonais que vous avez montrés, qui sont magnifiques, ça m'a vraiment touché, vraiment touché, montrent que ce n'est pas possible de savoir tout de suite ce qui nous manque. Est-ce que vous êtes d'accord? Are you okay with this interpretation? We cannot
Jordan, can you translate
immediately what need? Because what it needs, we attend a thing, but empty is a thing. It's very difficult.
Yeah.
But in France, there is a man who is a specialist of Japanese, of Moyen Âge, Japon du Moyen Âge. And he know very well non-standard philosophy. It is Alain Rocher.
Okay.
I will give his name.
Alain Rocher.
Alain Rocher.
Historian of the Middle Ages.
Yes. Il a vécu une quinzaine d'années au Japon et il connaît très bien la non-philosophie. parce que sa femme a traduit des textes de non-philosophie et ils ont travaillé ensemble. Et je pense aussi que Alain Rocher pourrait être une des personnes qui fasse le lien en France avec le Japon. Je pense, I think.
Alain Rocher, he lived 15 years in Japan, and he knows very well a non-standard philosophical text. His wife translated it. So François is telling us that he could be another, point of connection or a bridge between, non-standard philosophy as practiced in France and Japanese, well, I don't know if he also does Japanese philosophy, but anyway, history. So in a sense, it can be work with.
Et il y a une autre chose. François is never critical, never. I never heard by François. I live from more than 40 years with him. Never criticism on other philosophers. Never, 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 never. And he is very gentle, very, very. But in his writing, it is very strong. And in France, this contrast is very difficult to understand. It's impossible to a person so calm to have some souffle
Yeah, very strong.
in the writing.
So
is the sense of the intervention tout à l'heure of the dangerous.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's also really interesting how it's similar to Kyoto School philosophy stance. So I would like to come back to some of the questions that the theme of this conference. For instance, Kyoto School philosophers tend to think about entire European history, and one way or another, they understand the entire history of philosophy culminating into a certain form, and then they respond to it by saying it's something, intellectual traditions that address the question differently, can overcome the problem differently. And we've seen in this conference that we have seen the sort of echo or resonance between Kyoto School and Laruelle.
Yes, a resonance.
Resonance, yeah.
A resonance, yes.
Yeah. Stanimir, can you?
Yeah, thank you. I just want to add something not related to this, but it's just because I'm very interested throughout the years in comparisons. Most of the work I've done so far is comparisons, actually. As I was working on my talk, and in general, my idea, and thanks to Rocco and your Dancho, this worked out in some way. My idea to join this conference was just to go back to Nishitani, in particular, because I have good memories of Nishitani. Years ago, I stumbled upon his work. And as I was reading more and more about the Kyoto School, one thing that struck me in terms of comparability between the Kyoto School and non-philosophy is that there is a very interesting parallel in terms of origination, but it has to do with authority. Time and again, scholars single out the fact that Nishida is hardly to blame for the founding of the Kyoto School, given the fact that he was very liberal when it came to his followers and his disciples' views. He did ask them to develop their own independent views. And without having studied with either, there are people who studied with Laruelle here, but my impression so far has been that pretty much the same is true for Laruelle. If I'm not mistaken, I guess François can also speak about this, or your Dancho, but it strikes me as an interesting parallel that there is there's this kind of leeway of authority so to speak, when it comes to trying to compare the two. And I mean, in both cases, we have some kind of central figure, Nishida and Laruelle, as originators. It's just an impression that I wanted to share.
Mhm.
Thank you so much. That's really, really, yeah. And it was, I have to mention again that this conference covered, you know, if you organize the conference on Kyoto School, oftentimes you have 80% presentation on Nishida, and then maybe 10% on Watsuji, and then the remainders. But this conference was quite spread out. So we heard the Tosaka Miki by the Kazashi, Professor Kazashi, and we covered the different figures. So I'm quite pleased with this result. Rocco?
Yeah, just to build on what Stanimir said, I think another interesting parallel is that both Laruelle and Nishida were academic outsiders. That not just later in their work, but I think coming into academia from a non-standard point of access. That Nishida was effectively a high school dropout. And did not pursue the standard, success story of the university graduate student. And that's I'm actually curious if anyone knows how he even got the position at Kyoto University. It seems I haven't read anything of that history, but it seems that he was quite lucky to get an academic appointment. I mean, certainly he was a brilliant individual, but he didn't have the standard credentials that you would expect of someone who would smoothly enter into a professor chair. And I think the same thing was true from Laruelle in terms of his development in the French academic system, which is quite regimented. Both the Japanese and the French systems are not fluid and open-ended. That one succeeds in those systems by jumping through hoops that are fairly well established, even if one is specializing in transgressive material, like say the philosophy of Marx. One becomes a professor of Marxism by publishing in the right journals, knowing the right people, and so forth. And I don't think it's any accident that this, in both cases, a truly creative form of thought is developed in the academy, not at the center, but somewhat on the margin.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think Nishida was a high school teacher for a long while before he became even a professor. And Kyoto Imperial University back then was a very new university. So it doesn't have the same, the status as we would give it to the Kyoto University right now. And he was starting this kind of new school and very peculiar method of hiring other scholars. He wanted to say, I don't want this university to be serving just the local intellectuals, but I would like to create this place as a, university as a place in which all different, top scholars could come from around Japan and the world. So he was very cosmopolitan thinker in that regard. And of course, he received severe criticisms from Tanabe. Tanabe was hired as his first disciple, so he would carry the torch of Nishidan philosophy, but then Tanabe didn't have any intention to inherit. So he kind of created this, open-ended definition of Kyoto School that we can't tag one specific framework of thinking as the pinnacle of Kyoto School. And Jordan, for instance, mentioned that Watsuji is always kind of at the margin. Sometimes it's included, sometimes it's taken out. So perhaps that is another resonance of this, I guess, the subversiveness of this, over-determinate boundaries that we don't really know how to determinately draw, for instance. Stanimir, you wanted to add something? No? Okay.
I think that for Laruelle, the resistance against non-philosophy was very important, as positively important. He it is a difference between Laruelle and the il y a une différence, Jordanko, tu me traduiras si tu veux bien. Il y a une différence entre Laruelle et puis ses jeunes disciples. Parce que lui a créé la non-philosophie avec la résistance de la non-philosophie. Et les jeunes disciples n'ont plus besoin de cette résistance. Si vous voulez, on peut résumer les ouvrages de François. Il est tout à fait d'accord avec ça, j'en ai parlé avec lui, comme chaque fois des retables qui retiennent un instant un mouvement. Et ce retable a 3 parties. L'une, celle à gauche, c'est la philosophie telle qu'elle est. Au centre, il y a la machine Laruelle. Et à droite, il y a les effets de cette machine. Et souvent, les disciples ont beaucoup de conceptions, d'inventions dans toutes sortes de domaines. La poétique, la peinture, l'art, la philosophie, dans beaucoup de domaines. Mais ils arrivent à le faire sans cette résistance. Et là, il y aura peut-être quelque chose, enfin, ça a déjà été fait en Belgique, n'est-ce pas, avec Takeshi Morisato, l'idée de less resistance. C'est un problème non seulement externe, mais interne à la philosophie de Laruelle. Et je pense qu'avec ce colloque, vous êtes en train, comment dire, de donner un autre statut à cette résistance. Katrina le fait tout le temps aussi, avec une force et que j'admire, vraiment. Voilà.
There was a lot that François said, so I'm not sure if I got it all, but I'll try to do my best. So initially, right, when François began teaching and working on non-standard philosophy, there was a sort of resistance that, you know, from a position of resistance that this was done, in a sense, right? So the newly formed disciples of François, eventually they didn't need anymore this, let's say, postural resistance that was initially built into the non-standard or non-philosophical project that François, you know, elaborates and develops throughout different stages. So I think François, she kind of split in a tripartite structure how this evolved and how this kind of, you know, took form or shape, which would be on the left, there is the philosophie telle quelle, so philosophy as it is, right? And then at the center, we have, like François said, la machine. So the machine Laruelle, and on the right, we have the effects of this machine, right? I would add, this would be, you know, the engineering or re-engineering of concepts, and in this case, you know, philosophical concepts, so that they can be reused from a non-standard philosophical, you know, position, let's say. So there was this new novel creativity, and probably I think François is referring to the young scholars like we saw in Brussels, right? There was a lot of young researchers that we've never met, and they're on their own, which brings us back to, you know, the point we made earlier. Before we get to possible graduate studies and someone would take on a, you know, PhD project as an advisor, researchers are on their own in terms of formation. They read by themselves, maybe they go to conferences like this, but in a sense, there is a growing community. I mean, Rocco is an example of it, you know, in the US, the translations and so on. Katerina is doing that in Macedonia and the countries in the near abroad, and even wider than that. So now there's no more resistance. I mean, I'm not sure if I got the final part right. So in any case, things are loosening up. and we're seeing, and that's what I wanted to say, in a sense that the fact that it's spreading around the world, it's just a question of time, right? Before it actually materializes into, proper institutional frameworks where either from an epistemological perspective and as a method, or as a science of philosophy in its own right, or as an actual, even department. I mean, I wouldn't go that far at this point, but anything's possible, and it's spreading. And this conference, as well as the one in Brussels, it's a testament that we're, this is evolving in its own right. So yeah, and François said something along the lines that we're beginning a new phase with this conference, in a sense. So yeah, j'espère que j'ai rendu bien ce que tu voulais dire.
Merci. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. So Mahab and Hannes share in the chat that the academic structure in Germany and the UK going opposed to that sort of non-standard philosophy, and our insight is that perhaps even academic institution can change, go through some sort of structural change to be able to accommodate non-standard philosophy into this. And Jordan is a little bit hesitant to say it, but I was even hesitant to call this possibility of this conference. So maybe in some ways it could actually constitute these academic programs that, take insight from non-standard philosophy. Yeah. Does anybody have any questions that you'd like to share? Or anything that you'd like to elaborate on? You can just raise your hand and share. If not, maybe I could just supply some questions. So maybe, just granted that the academia will be able to restructure itself, or, this epidemic or pandemic of non-standard philosophy into this world knowledge system. And then we create this field in which we have more constructive discussions about history of philosophy from non-standard philosophical point of view. How do we teach non-standard philosophy? So this would be my pedagogical question, right? So I asked several times to Jordan in the past, it seems like a non-standard philosophy is claiming that you study the history of philosophy, and there's a tipping point where you say, yeah, but this is not doing what it's actually claiming to do. There's something we are missing, right? That we need to actually critique the entire history of philosophy. So can we teach non-standard philosophy in undergraduate, or no, there's a moment in which there's a kind of turn from study of philosophy as what it is to study of philosophy from this radical alternative point of view?
Let me add something. I mean, we all know that François was really good friend with both Deleuze and Derrida, right? And they got together in Paris in the apartment and had lengthy discussions. And Deleuze says it himself that Laruelle is the most radical among us, right? If we can teach Deleuze and if we can teach Derrida, I don't see why we can't teach Laruelle. And I think that's the package, right? Probably, if we establish some kind of, novel, probably not history of philosophy, course, but something that involves French theory, let's call it, or whatever, from that specific group of people, and maybe even Ed Foucault or someone else, doesn't matter, they're all kind of, touching upon different, in different ways. There's like even isomorphism of sort between the ideas, sometimes between these thinkers, and deployed and developed and elaborated in a different way. I think it's just, we need to show that, like Hannes had, I wish Hannes talked more about Laruelle than Deleuze, but it was great anyway. So that's something I would like to talk to you about, where you can take your project next with Laruelle. And I couldn't, speak because we didn't have time, but we'll get to talk to each other, I hope. that's how we need to package this, and we need to bring out that Laruelle is not someone that stands out completely out of the bunch, even though he is the most radical, right? But he is part of that group of thinkers, and he deserves that place among those, thinkers. So that's how I would approach it, at least, from this perspective.
Okay, so maybe perhaps we could give this floor to Katerina just to talk about this program that you share on the chat, and then we can close this session with Rocco.
No, this is just the same program I mentioned, the doctoral study program in Prague. So this is, as far as I can understand, Czech, this is contemporary ontological thought, right? Stanimir, you might understand, because it's a Slavic language, so we can kind of understand. So it's not just Laruelle, it's also Delanda, Graham Harman, etc. But here is Laruelle as well. So I mean, it's not a special, a separate subject as I remember, but it's even better actually. You can see that it's very well integrated in something that is so generic as contemporary ontology. So I mean, I think that the time when Laruelle was, this outsider or whatever from the mainstream is over. And as far as his career and advancement is concerned, I don't think that he was an outsider. I think that he had a pretty, standard path of, he might be of humble background, but the career was, pretty well established within the institutional system of, French academia. But anyway, the question is his thought now on non-standard philosophy and how integrated it can be. I don't think that it's, such a, I don't know, such an anomaly. Stanimir defended a PhD on Laruelle at the Central European University, which is now based in Vienna. I was 2 years ago an external examiner of Alice Lucy Recap's thesis at Kingston University, which was on Anne's work and François' philosophy. So it's not, so it's not the same situation like, I don't know, 15 years ago. It's far better integrated into the educational system than it used to be.
I think Rocco had a hands up.
It's
just very briefly. I mean, I completely agree with both Katerina and Yordonchko, but I think it does go back to the point made by Mahbub that I think we need to distinguish between Laruelle and his academic production and the actual practice of non-philosophy. And so it might be parallel in some sense to, say, Husserl and phenomenology. We can study Husserl and we can study Husserl's works and it's wonderful. But there's also a method that Husserl introduces that goes beyond Husserl himself. He doesn't own phenomenology. And Laruelle's work is extraordinary, but what he introduces has a theoretical robustness that is not a matter of being encapsulated in his works, right? And we should take example from what he does rather than what he says. And one of the things that he does is he never rests. I think the extraordinary character of his work, especially in the last phase, the last 15 years, is to create a series of works that no one could have expected based on what had come before. No one would have expected that quantum mechanics would become the core of a modification inside non-philosophy. And then to build on that, to create this kind of operatic scenography of the universe as a coming into sound, right? A bringing humans into the heavens through a kind of silent music oratorio. Like this was completely unprepared by the earlier work. And this is what we should do. right? Of course, and we should study Laruelle's work just as we should study Deleuze, and we should study, I mean, it's extraordinary inside the academic field, but his practice gives us an example to follow that opens possibilities that remain to be realized.
Thank you so much. I think there's a lot of resonance here. So let's start with the standing meal, and then Professor Kazushi, and then Mahfoud. We still have a time. So let's go from standing meal.
Yeah, I completely agree with Katerina's remark that Laruelle is not the Laruelle we are thinking about 20 years ago. This is evidenced by the fact that, we, the non-philosophical communities or micro communities spread throughout the world, are already in a position where we can differentiate between generations of non-philosophers. I think it's important to spell this out, because the work that people like Katerina Ray-Brassier, Joe Gralet, around the early years of Amphi, etc., did has its impact now. So we're not in a, I just want to spell this out again, we're not really in a place where we have to think of how do we globalize or popularize non-philosophy. I think it's more now a question of fine-tuning the directions of this globalization of non-philosophy, rather than just tinkering on the how. Yeah, that's about it.
Thank you, Professor Kazushi.
Yes, thank you very much. And first of all, I'd like to say thank you again for this very interesting conference. And regarding the questions, I'd like to say two things basically. And one thing is related to the point raised by the Professor Rocco Gango yesterday regarding Nishitani's critique of Nishida. And actually, I also find that critique very, very important. And but I think Nishitani in that context also brought into focus the fact that most of the time, actually, including philosophers maybe, are living according to the ego-centered viewpoint and hunbetsu no tachiba. And but simply because Nishida's philosophical standpoint or approach was so thoroughgoing, Nishitani hinted that Nishida may have lost sight of this very simple fact that we are usually living in the ego-centered reality. And I think so this is related to how to think about the position of philosophy, not only in relation to philosophers themselves, but also into the mundane historical world, and which turned out actually, as you know, a very central axial problem, not only for Nishida and the Kyoto School philosophers, and also we expand our horizon more. We know that, for example, there are already, for example, very controversial, but to think of Richard Rorty's sort of stance, he really called into question the status of philosophy with regard to, for example, democracy, right? So according to him, the philosophers should give up on the Platonic sort of idea of the philosopher king. So I think there are all very sort of experimental and very challenging sort of views presented regarding this question of relationship between philosophy and other disciplines, also philosophy and other human activities, politics and art. So I think if we pose this question, and at least I think leaving aside the institutional positioning for the moment, I think we can present. Here's a view by a view of Roti, and here's a view presented by Kyoto School philosophers and Laruelle. So I think this is can be one of the focus. And also, similarly, I'd like to say about the possibilities of trying a so-called issue-centered or problem-centered sort of approach with regard to this sort of possibility. That is say, Laruelle and also for Kyoto School philosophers, for example, problem of technology or art or ecology, and all these really pressing questions we are facing with. And so we can present at least we can introduce, this is a view of the Kyoto School philosophers, and this is a view or attempt tried by François Laruelle. I think so. Then I think this is very natural. This can be a very natural sort of entry way for students and for other people. This is the initial sort of ideas I came to get all through this conference and also this last roundtable discussion. Thank you very much.
I would just like to add something because I worked side by side with Professor Kazushi at the Kobe Graduate School of Humanities, where I got actually a chance to choose a novel approach, and we chose the speculative turn, the reader that came out, that consists of various, kind of loosely assembled authors, among which Laruelle as well. There's an excerpt from the Introduction to Generic Sciences there, and I intentionally chose that one so that we can read Laruelle. We didn't read everything. We read maybe Kantan Meyasu, Laruelle, and a few others, and it was really exceptional experience because the Japanese students, which are completely unadjusted to this kind of language in philosophy, right? It turned out to be a really interesting experiment. It was difficult, but it wasn't a failure. I mean, they did pretty well. And what Professor Kazushi is saying, that we can find ways to integrate Laruelle with something else, right? Already existing, and just add this as a novel approach, as a novel perspective, or, whatever we may have. So I just wanted to add that, and I wanted to thank also Professor Kazushi for that opportunity at Kobe. Yeah, that was great.
No,
yeah, we can definitely. Sorry, go ahead, Professor Kazushi.
No, I just wanted to say to Yodancho, it was our pleasure.
Yeah, it's great that the these sort of what Rocco was saying about the the silent music of non-standard philosophy can be resound through something else when you're actually reading and with students in Japan, for instance. But I would like to actually point back to Mabub, because you started this existential concern with the non-standard philosophy, and we got you the music. So I'd like to hear what you thought about all these discussions.
Wow, thank you for asking me to provide some feedback on everything I've heard. Well, first of all, I really appreciate all the answers. It's what an extraordinary kind of collection of thoughts and responses. When I used the word danger, which Stanimir and Katerina seized upon, and to some extent Nodenko, I kind of regretted that I had used that word, because it was basically I was just reaching for some provocative term. It wasn't my actual intention. But now, having heard all the responses, I'm I kind of don't regret that I used it, because I think I did mean that there ought to be I want to dig my heels here a little bit by way of provocation. I do think that there needs to be a certain risk still and danger associated with the study of philosophy and the history of philosophy. Like, I think part of the worldly conjuncture that motivates Laruelle's work, particularly if you read, texts like Introduction to Non-Marxism, is the catalogue of crimes, frankly, against humanity at the feet of philosophy and the history of philosophy. So I don't think we have any, I think it's more than warranted for us to explode myths and structures and institutions, but obviously in a rigorous and, disciplined manner. I'm not saying that this is a kind of all-out anarchy, which basically just spins around in the void. I mean, that's not what we're talking about here. But if we really want to attend to this kind of our present predicament and conjuncture, which is basically pathetic, right? I don't see we have any other way to do this. I'm not suggesting at all, of course, that academic studies and programs shouldn't be pursued. I mean, that has to happen. That's part of the world that we live in, right? But I would like to think that the posture of that's articulated by non-philosophy and the vision in one is something radically prior to all of that. Right? So at another level, we can re-articulate that type of posture and gesture. So it's not something that can be domesticated into a particular theory or system or curriculum, whatever. It's always remains radically prior to that. And one final thing I'd like to say, I know that perhaps some of what I'm saying might sound a little bit mystical, but then, I mean, Tetralogus, although it's in French, I haven't read it, but the very little I've read about it, that to me sounds very much like the kind of journeys that mystics in the past had pursued through. I'm not saying that it is a work of spirituality, but there are very strong parallels and resonances. I don't think we can, I think that deserves to be given some kind of attention.
Yeah, I think that's a very good place to actually end, because there's even within these participants of the panel, there's sort of swaying back and forth between this comfortable, benign introduction of Laruelle to academic philosophy. Still will create ripples, but it's something that we can achieve within the conventional academic structure, whilst we have this image of non-standard philosophy that is even bigger than Laruelle himself, that could cause massive pressure to this ongoing system. So, and most importantly, coming toward the end of the time. So I'd like to actually give the floor to Jordan, but thank you so much everyone for this fantastic roundtable, and I hope we can do this every year, in the beginning of every year, to talk about these important issues in philosophy. So thank you so much, and floor is yours, Jordan.
Thank you, Takeshi, for your contribution. You elucidated a lot of things about Nishida, and you did a great job. I mean, this roundtable wouldn't have been as good as if we had probably a different moderator. So thank you for that. And I would like to thank everyone on behalf of the TUJ Philosophy Lecture Series. I would like to thank again Professor George Miller, who's not here right now, but who gave us an opening address yesterday. Without him, this wouldn't have been possible. And also thank to Rocco and everyone else, especially, we did a lot of work putting this together. So without Rocco, I don't think I would have done it myself alone. So this was a really great, joint venture, let's call it. Everyone here also gave great feedback and participation. And I would just like to ask François, I don't know if François is there nearby, if he has anything, and a short message in a bottle for us, maybe of sort, just to end on that note, this conference. Françoise, y a-t-il un message de la part de François ou de toi-même, ou les deux, que vous vouliez partager avec nous?
Eh bien, continuons à faire de la philosophie ensemble.
Let's
Voilà.
continue.
Voilà. Même les noms, même les contradictions nous permettent de continuer. Et merci beaucoup pour ce magnifique colloque qui a fait connaître des éléments de la philosophie japonaise, des éléments de la non-philosophie et aussi de la philosophie. C'était tout à fait magnifique. Nous vous remercions vraiment beaucoup. Mais surtout, continuons. Continuons.
Le plaisir est à nous de vous avoir eu aussi, toi en tant que... tu as donné une présentation magnifique et aussi que François, il était là aussi, on l'a vu, donc je pense que tout le monde est très content. Ouais. Et donc, je vous remercie.
Mais sa santé n'est pas bonne. Sa santé n'est pas bonne. Mais enfin, on arrive à pacifier un peu tout ça. On essaye d'arranger l'appartement, mais la santé n'est pas très bonne. Voilà.
Ben, nous vous souhaitons que le meilleur, surtout pendant cette crise.
Merci pour vous aussi. Ah oui. Pour vous tous aussi. Pour vous tous aussi.
On va sûrement continuer le travail. On va sûrement organiser un autre colloque, peut-être la fin de cette année ou l'année prochaine, mais sûrement on y arrive.
C'est bravo, bravo. No. Bravo, Jordanko, bravo.
So just to translate quickly, François and François Laruelle are saying that let's continue to work together. Let's continue our philosophical journey together. And unfortunately, François' health is not at his best, but they're doing everything they can, and we all wish them good health, longevity, and to see them again together with us, and that we're going to continue our work on our end. So speaking of which, I would just like to share this with everyone in just a second. So we're going to publish in Japan, and François has already mentioned it. So we have Script Philosophique, Le Silence du Futur. This is the first volume that's coming up really soon. And then, we have Économie générale des effets d'être. This was announced actually a long time ago, which is François Laruelle's thesis that he worked together under the guidance of Paul Ricoeur. And that's going to be published by Chishokudo right after we publish Anne-François, probably in the first trimester of this year. So coming real soon, and we'll share the news. Also, I think I would let probably Rocco speak about the call for actual papers that we're trying to launch from this conference. So Rocco, why don't you go ahead and tell us about that?
Sure, and yeah, and first off, I just wanted to thank everyone who participated. It was really wonderful to most of you meet for the first time. A few of you see you again. It's really, really great.
Oui, d'accord.
I appreciated all the talks and all the questions and participation. Thanks especially to TUJ for hosting, especially to Jordancho, who really did the great sort of majority of the work behind the scenes making this possible. So I really appreciate that. We do hope to gather the presentations or the papers that the presentations were based on into a collection. Any of you who were participating just by listening, if you have a paper that you would like to contribute that links Laruelle and the Kyoto School, we would be interested in seeing those. And there'll be some kind of official call for papers for the collection that we'll pull together in the next month or so. But just keep an eye out for that, and we'll try to keep you all informed. But for sure, we want to take the work of this conference and translate it into some kind of edited collection. So yeah, back to you, Jordan.
Thank you, Rocco. I think Anne-Françoise has something for us. Probably François wants to make a short appearance. Ah, okay, on nous demande. So we have direct, greeting from François himself, and he says hi to all and thanks us all for the conference. And if we made François happy, I think we did a great job. So thank you all again. Really, this was a great experience. I think we couldn't have imagined. We had no expectations, and what turned out to be even bigger and better than we could hope for. So I think this format proved to be a good, as a template for online conferences, which we'll definitely use again in the future. And hopefully we would like to see you all in person, the US, France, in Tokyo, or wherever, opportunity arises. It would be great to meet again, yes, in person. So again, on behalf of everyone, and TUJ and everyone that participated and made a contribution, really, we appreciate a lot, scrambling last minute, joining, doing all sorts of things. So this was, without all of you, wouldn't have been as great as it was. So thank you all, really, we appreciate it. Kazushi Sensei, are you trying to say anything, or?
No. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
No. So on that note, on a positive note from Tokyo, I would say good night to everyone. I mean, those who are in the same time zone, have a great day. If it's morning or
Les adieux qui n'en finissent pas.
Yeah, and hope to see you soon. And we'll reach out and find a way how to communicate and keep the conversation going.
Oui, là c'est Jordanko, oui. Mais il y a eu Takeshi Morisato que tu connais aussi, et d'autres. Voilà.
Au revoir.
Merci, François.
Au revoir. Au revoir.
Au revoir.
François vous crie au revoir.
Merci.
Au revoir.
Au revoir, François.
Merci, au revoir.
Au revoir, Anas.